2 years ago, my boss fired me with a severance of exactly $10. I still have the bill, folded twice in my wallet, a reminder of the day he laughed in my face and told me I'd never be worth more than cheap coffee. Today, that same man is sitting outside my office, waiting for me to save his collapsing company. Back then, I walked out of the glass doors with a box under my arm and $10 in my pocket, trying not to let him see how badly my hands were shaking. I had spent 3 years at that firm, giving it everything: late nights, missed weekends, cleaning up his messes so the clients would never know how careless he was. And when he fired me, it wasn't even about performance. It was about ego. He wanted a scapegoat for a failed project, someone expendable. The cruelest part was the smile. That smug little smirk as he reached into his wallet, peeled off a single 10, and slapped it on my desk like it was an act of mercy. "Don't spend it all in one place," he said, loud enough for the office to hear. My coworkers looked down at their screens, silent. I don't blame them. Everyone needed their job. But it burned. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the bill. Rent was due in a week. My bank account was low. My pride was lower. I couldn't even bring myself to tell my parents the truth. All I said was, "Work's been tough," but I made a decision. If I was going to be discarded like trash, I'd make damn sure that the people who mattered, the clients I had fought for, the colleagues I respected, knew the truth about who actually kept things running. The first call came 3 days later. A client I had managed for years said, "Hey, why isn't your name on these new project updates? They're a mess." I hesitated, then told him the truth. I was gone. He sighed, almost in relief. "That explains it. Look, if you ever land somewhere else, I'll move with you." That was the crack in the dam. More calls followed. Vendors asking why deadlines were missed. Partners frustrated with sloppy communication. Each one quietly told me the same thing: "We trusted you, not the company." I didn't have a job yet, but I had something more valuable: loyalty. Meanwhile, my old boss was busy celebrating. He told anyone who'd listen that he'd cut the fat. I heard through a former coworker that he'd mocked me in a meeting. All that kid ever did was play therapist to clients, waste a payroll. They laughed, I guess. But the thing is, those therapy sessions were why clients stayed. I listened, I cared, I fixed problems before they exploded. And there was one more thing he didn't know. I had kept everything: email trails, signed off deliverables, the original playbooks I built from scratch. Nothing shady, nothing illegal, just documentation. The kind of boring but vital details he never bothered with. The kind that could save or sink a company. I remember one night, a week after I was fired, sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by folders. My stomach was empty, but my head was buzzing. For the first time, I realized something. He thought he had taken everything from me. In reality, he had handed me the leverage. So when I got that call from a client, one of the firm's biggest contracts, asking if I could meet them privately, I knew the story wasn't over. And if you want the full receipts, stay with me, because the way this played out, you'll never look at a $10 bill the same way again. After that first client call, I thought maybe it was just a one-off, a kind word to make me feel better. But then the second call came, then the third. Within a month, I had quietly spoken to 6 different clients, all of them furious with how my old boss was running things. Each one ended the same way: "If you ever start somewhere new, call us first." But back then, somewhere new didn't exist. I was broke, living off instant noodles, applying to jobs that ghosted me after the first interview. Every rejection email hit like a punch. I'd sit at my desk at 2 a.m., scrolling through job boards, wondering how I went from leading million-dollar projects to begging for entry-level positions. Still, I refused to disappear. I wrote handwritten thank you notes to every client I had ever worked with, just to let them know I appreciated their trust. I started freelancing. Nothing glamorous, just troubleshooting, late-night tech support, a little copy editing on proposals. Sometimes I got paid, sometimes I didn't, but I was planting seeds. Meanwhile, word about my old boss trickled back. He was optimizing operations, which was code for slashing staff. People who had been with the company for 10 years were suddenly gone. The ones left behind were drowning. I met one of my old coworkers, Lisa, for coffee. She looked exhausted, her hands shaking from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. "He doesn't even pretend anymore," she said. "He tells clients we're ahead of schedule while screaming at us to fake reports. Last week, he called me at midnight to rewrite a timeline just so he could pitch it to the board." I asked her why she didn't leave. She laughed bitterly. "Where am I going to go? Rent's due. Insurance is through the company. He knows we're trapped." That stuck with me. He was feeding off their desperation the same way he had fed off my silence the day he handed me that $10 bill. Then came the meeting that changed everything. One of the vendors I used to manage asked me to sit in on a call. "Just as a favor," they said. My old company was botching a crucial compliance update, and they didn't trust the timelines they were hearing. I joined quietly, mostly listening. And sure enough, within minutes, my old boss was spinning lies about how everything is on track. The vendor pushed back. He doubled down. Finally, I spoke up. "That's not correct," I said. "The system can't even handle that kind of load without a full migration." There was a pause. The vendor's rep asked, "And you are—" My boss's voice cracked like glass. "He doesn't work here anymore." But it was too late. The vendor recognized my voice. "Wait, you're the one who wrote the original specs, right? The only reason we signed was because of your plan." I stayed calm, polite, professional. "Yes, and your compliance deadline is in 60 days. If the migration isn't handled properly, you'll be out of certification and penalties will hit 6 figures. Silence. Then the vendor said, "Send me your rate." That night, sitting in my tiny apartment, I realized what had just happened. I wasn't looking for revenge. I didn't need to humiliate him. All I had to do was be good at my job. And every time he lied, every corner he cut, every time he mocked me for playing therapist to clients, all of it made me more valuable to the very people he was failing. Over the next few months, I built something new. Slowly, quietly, carefully. I joined a small competitor, lean, underfunded, but hungry. They gave me a modest salary, but full autonomy. In return, I brought not secrets, not stolen clients, but trust. Clients who were desperate for honesty, vendors who wanted competence, former coworkers who just wanted someone to treat them like humans. And then one day, Lisa called me again. Her voice was tight, almost shaking. "You need to see this," she whispered. She sent me a file. It was a ledger, half redacted, clearly not meant for outside eyes. Payments to shell vendors, timelines falsified, expenses that didn't add up. She didn't say how she got it, and I didn't ask. But as I scrolled through the numbers, I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't just mismanagement, it was fraud. And the deadline that was going to blow it wide open was just around the corner. I spent the next few nights sitting at my kitchen table with Lisa's file spread out in front of me. The numbers didn't lie. Double-billed vendors, consulting fees to companies that didn't exist, expenses coded as office supplies that totaled more than most salaries. It wasn't just sloppy, it was deliberate. And the thing about deliberate fraud is, eventually, it leaves a trail. So I started building my own trail. Every email I had sent during my years at the company was archived, time-stamped, with delivery receipts. Every playbook I had written, onboarding guides, migration steps, client SOPs, was dated and backed up in my personal cloud. Nothing proprietary, nothing stolen, just proof of what I'd built. Proof that the foundation was mine. I documented everything that was already public, the compliance deadlines, the project filings, the client contracts that were available to anyone who looked closely enough. I wasn't hacking into anything. I wasn't leaking anything. I was just watching, connecting dots. And every dot spelled out the same truth. My old boss was balancing his empire on rotten beams. At the same time, I was settling into the new firm. It wasn't glamorous. The office was 2 rooms above a laundromat, The chairs squeaked, the coffee machine leaked, and the Wi-Fi router needed a kick to stay alive. But there was something honest about it. My new boss, a wiry guy named Daniel, didn't care about ego. He cared about results. I don't need magic, he told me the first day. I need systems that work. So I gave him systems. I pulled late nights rewriting documentation. I designed migration playbooks so simple that even the least technical client could follow them. I built feedback loops into every project. Things my old boss used to sneer at as hand-holding. Clients loved it. They weren't dazzled. They were relieved. Finally, someone was speaking their language. And then it happened. One of my old clients invoked the clause I had tucked into their original contract years before. It was a small detail, something my boss had ignored when he skimmed the paperwork. The clause allowed them to exit for cause if the company failed to meet compliance standards. Guess what? They had missed the standard. Twice. That client came straight to me. They didn't ask if I could take over, they begged. And because I was now with a competitor, I could do it clean. No breach of contract, no stolen data. Just a legal, transparent exit that left my old boss scrambling. Word spread. One client turned into two. Two turned into four. Each time, I explained patiently, here's what went wrong, here's how we'll fix it, here's the timeline, and here's the documentation to prove it. I didn't promise miracles. I promised honesty. And after years of smoke and mirrors, honesty was more valuable than gold. Meanwhile, inside his company, the cracks widened. Lisa told me about midnight meetings where he raged at staff for not covering his back. She told me about junior employees being told to backdate reports. One night, she called in tears. He told me to delete the audit trail, she whispered. If I do this, I'll lose my license. If I don't, I'll lose my job. I told her not to touch it. Send everything you can to compliance, I said. Protect yourself. She did, quietly, carefully, and within weeks regulators had opened an inquiry, not because of me, not because of revenge, but because the evidence spoke for itself. Around the same time, layoffs hit. Whole departments wiped out in the name of cost efficiency. Some of the best people I had ever worked with were suddenly unemployed. They called me, desperate, humiliated, and I made a promise. If I could build something strong enough, there would be a place for them again. By then, the picture was clear. My old boss had built his kingdom on arrogance and fraud. I had built mine on trust, documentation, and quiet persistence. It was only a matter of time before the scales tipped. And then the tipping point arrived. One of the biggest projects on his books, the flagship contract he had bragged about for years, started to buckle. The timelines he faked couldn't hold. The regulators were circling. The clients were furious. And for the first time in 2 years, my phone lit up with a number I recognized but never thought I'd see again. It was him. And he wasn't calling to gloat. He was calling to beg. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. I almost didn't answer. I was finishing a project timeline with Daniel, my new boss, and the office was quiet except for the hum of the laundromat machines downstairs. The number flashed on my phone, and for a second I thought it was a prank. But it wasn't. It was him. "Listen," he said before I could even speak, his voice sharp with panic. "We need to talk. Right now." I let the silence stretch. It rattled him. "Look," he continued, his words spilling too fast. "The board is breathing down my neck. That flagship account, it's slipping, and you're the only one who can fix it. I'll pay whatever you want. A blank check. Just come back." I almost laughed. The same man who tossed me out with a $10 bill 2 years ago was now begging me to name my price. But I didn't laugh. I let him talk. He rambled about deadlines, angry clients, disappearing staff. He even tried flattery. "You were always the brains of the operation. I didn't appreciate it then, but I do now. Come back and we'll make it right." I cut him off. "You're calling me at midnight, offering a blank check, and you think this is about money?" Silence. Then softer. "So what is it about?" I didn't answer. I hung up. The next morning, I met Lisa and two other ex-colleagues at a greasy diner on the edge of town. They looked worn down, thinner than I remembered, but their eyes still had fight. Over cold coffee and pancakes, they told me what had happened in the past month. Layoffs without severance, health insurance canceled mid-treatment for some, the CFO resigning quietly and disappearing overseas, and now the company on the brink of collapse. "He's going to drag us all down with him," Lisa said, her voice low, "unless someone stops him." That was the moment I made my choice. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about protecting the people he had discarded like trash. Over the next week, Daniel and I worked non-stop. We drafted rescue proposals for the clients who were panicking, not poaching, not stealing, but offering stability, documented plans, legal compliance, transparent timelines. Word spread fast. Clients signed with us out of desperation at first, but then out of relief. Meanwhile, my old boss doubled down. He sent desperate emails. He showed up at a client's office unannounced, waving contracts and shouting about loyalty. He even left a voicemail on my phone, his voice cracking. "You're making a mistake. We need you. I'll give you equity. Half the company. Just come back." But the truth was, I didn't need his company. I already had what mattered: trust. Then the inevitable happened. The board called an emergency meeting. But this time they didn't just want him. They wanted me. They demanded I show up, sit across from the man who once fired me with a smirk, and tell them exactly what I knew. I remember standing outside that boardroom, the $10 bill still folded in my wallet, thinking, 2 years ago he said I wasn't worth more than this. Let's see what he thinks now. I pushed the door open. Every seat was filled. He was at the head of the table, pale, sweating, eyes darting like a cornered animal. When he saw me, his jaw tightened, and for the first time, he didn't look like a boss. He looked like a man about to lose everything. The boardroom smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Suits lined the table, their faces tight, eyes shifting between me and him. He sat at the head, trying to project authority, but the sweat on his temples betrayed him. "Glad you could join us," the chairman said, gesturing toward an empty chair. I didn't sit. My old boss cleared his throat. "Let me be clear. This meeting is unnecessary. He's a disgruntled ex-employee. He has an axe to grind. We shouldn't even be entertaining this circus." But the chairman raised a hand. "Sit down." For a moment, I thought he might refuse. But he did, stiffly, the leather chair squeaking as if mocking him. I set a folder on the table. Inside was nothing flashy, just receipts, public filings, project timelines, compliance deadlines, vendor invoices, all the little details he always thought were beneath him. I slid the first document forward. "This is the compliance timeline for the flagship account. According to your official updates, it's complete." I paused, then pulled out another sheet. "But here's the regulator's record. Not only is it incomplete, it's non-compliant. Penalties are accruing as we speak." The CFO's empty chair loomed like a ghost. One board member whispered, "He signed off on this?" I nodded. "And here's the kicker. These expenses," I tapped the ledger Lisa had sent me, "don't go to real vendors. They go to shell companies, companies tied directly to his accounts." Gasps. Murmurs. My boss shot up, slamming his fist. "Lies! All of it! Fabricated by someone I fired for incompetence." I didn't flinch. I reached into the folder and pulled out one last piece of evidence. A simple USB drive. I plugged it into the projector. The screen lit up with an email trail, his name stamped across every line. Orders to backdate reports. Instructions to delete audit trails. Proof. The room went still, and then from the far end of the table, a voice broke the silence. It was a junior staffer, someone barely out of college. Hands trembling, voice shaking, she said, "He told me to falsify timelines. If I refused, he said, I'd never work in this industry again." Her words hit harder than any document. The board shifted. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced by something I had never seen in him before. Fear. The chairman leaned forward. "Is this true?" He sputtered. They're lying, all of them, don't you see? This is a coordinated attack. But it was over. Security was called. He tried to argue, tried to bluster, but the guards stood firm. When they took him by the arm and led him out, his protests echoed down the hall, hollow and desperate. I stood there quietly, my heart pounding. Then I pulled one last thing from my wallet, the crumpled $10 bill. I smoothed it out on the table and placed it on top of the folder. This, I said, was my severance. I'm proposing we start a fund. Every penalty recovered, every clawback goes here. For the staff he discarded, for the people who held this company together while he lined his pockets. Silence, then nods, then murmurs of agreement, and just like that, the balance shifted. The empire he built on arrogance collapsed in the span of a single meeting. Weeks passed. The old company staggered on like a wounded animal, but without him at the helm, things began to change. Projects that had been on life support stabilized under the frameworks I'd written years ago. Clients that had been lied to were finally given honesty. And the people he had discarded, Lisa, the junior staffer who spoke up, half a dozen others, found work again, many of them through contracts we helped them land. The severance fund became real. The board approved it unanimously, seeded by penalties clawed back from his falsified reports. Every laid-off employee received a payment far greater than the $10 I had been handed. Some cried when they opened the envelopes. Others just sat in silence, staring, as if waiting for the catch that never came. I thought that was the end, but men like him never fade quietly. 3 weeks later, he reappeared, this time flanked by a PR team and cameras. He barged into the lobby of the office where I work now, waving a giant novelty check like some twisted game show host. On it, in bold letters, $1 million. He looked thinner, more desperate, but his smile was the same oily smirk. A token of apology, he announced, loud enough for the cameras, to show the world we can move forward together. Let's bury the hatchet. The reporters turned to me, microphones shoved in my face. I reached into my wallet and pulled out the old, crumpled $10 bill. I held it up for everyone to see. This, I said into the cameras, was my severance. $10. That's what he thought I was worth. So here's what I'm going to do. I walked over to the giant check, uncapped a marker, and scrawled across the payee line, Employee Severance Fund. Then I handed it back to him. You want redemption? Start here. Pay back the people you broke. The lobby erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes went off, and for once he didn't have a comeback. He stood there frozen, his smile cracking, the cameras catching every second of it. The board later announced that the company would be acquired by a larger competitor. Buried in the acquisition terms was a clause, one I had written into the playbooks years ago, that required adherence to the frameworks I designed. In other words, the systems he had mocked as worthless were now the industry standard, and I was their gatekeeper. That night, alone in my office, I unfolded the $10 bill again. The creases were deeper, the edges frayed, but I didn't see humiliation anymore. I saw proof. Proof that no matter how small someone tries to make you, your worth isn't in their hands. I slipped it back into my wallet, smiled to myself, and whispered the words I had waited 2 years to say, paid in full,